that aired or became available for streaming during the 7-year run toward Piper Chapman's mother's feeble pronouncement of the word bisexuals at the end of the last season. In several series, a bisexual character came out. A bisexual character comes out declaring or even singing the B word, whether in adolescence or in middle age, as the latter is not an uncommon time frame for bisexuals to come out. Bi characters' self-discovery leads to their communicating this newfound identity to others. This is part of a larger work in progress, as I said, but here I'm focusing on the progress in bisexual coming out stories since Orange is the New Black, and the representation that remains to be improved, for instance, in going past biphobia and bi stereotypes, and in going past coming out stories to bi characters living their lives, as bisexual actress Ashley Shine astutely pointed out in a Los Angeles Bi Task Force roundtable on bisexual culture last month. In TV series, as in life, the discussion about bisexuality is far from over, as Julia Shaw points out regarding the latter, life, in the introduction to her book, Bi, The Hidden Culture, History, and Science of Bisexuality. Panelists in the roundtable about the future of bisexuality just before this session also made this point. Shiri Eisner stated aptly that the discourse on stereotypes accords attention to what others say about us, about bisexuals, meaning we have less space to talk about ourselves and our issues. I'm going to start by talking a little bit about Broad City. In the 5-season Comedy Central series, 2014 to 19, 20-something New Yorker best friends Alana and Abby, played by creators Alana Wexler and Abby Jacobs, strike a middle ground. Like Piper Chapman, Alana and Abby both date across genders and lack the need or feel the lack of need to self-identify. However, when Alana dates her doppelganger, Alia Shawkat plays her, only to stop seeing her when she realizes their striking similarity, as when Abby goes out with lesbian Dr. Leslie, played by Clea Duvall, after the doctor treats her in the ER, their dating adventures raise the topic of dating and gender for discussion. The characters and series' minimal attention to labeling sexual orientation lacks the awkwardness that the circuitousness creates about the same in Orange is the New Black, in part because the other Broad City characters, some of whom are themselves queer, express no concern about the orientations of the main characters in the way that Piper Chapman's family and her partners do with respect to her. However, Alana, in her humorously indirect manner, uses a hat metaphor to ask Abby whether she's going to continue dating women beyond this first experience with Dr. Leslie. In the episode Lost and Found, Alana asks Abby, "So you're a hat girl now?" Abby responds, "I mean, I guess I never really considered them, but Leslie bought it for me, so I'm gonna give it a try." The object pronoun them refers to hats, but also evokes women, the fashion accessory standing in for the gender, thus revealing that her same gender interest is new. Alana, who has long expressed her desire for her best friend Abby, who often brushes off the sexual interest in favor of platonic friendship, not often, who always does, queries, quote, "Do you think you're going to be a hat person for the rest of your life?" Abby responds with a question of her own. "I don't know. Are we talking about hats?" Interestingly, in the LGBT plus forum, them, Trish Bendix not only calls Alana, quote, "the wild one," but also labels her, quote, "polyamorous, pansexual, highly flexible, up for anything, anytime," end quote. Ilana's wildness and spontaneity, lighthearted and fun, certainly don't hold a candle to the criminal and unethical behavior that not only get Piper Chapman into prison, but also that emerges in full force during Piper's incarceration. However, more to the point about labeling, in the quote artsy fartsy episode of Broad City, Ilana self-labels as a polyamorous bisexual in the breakup discussion with her boyfriend Lincoln. Although bisexuality and pansexuality are fraternal, if not identical twins, given Ilana's own use of the word bisexual, Trish Bendix's choice of the word pansexual perhaps reflects a bias against the B word, and one that is not uncommon. Desiree Akhavan's character Layla in the actress, filmmaker, writer's 2018 sixth episode limited series, boldly, I say in scare quotes, named The Bisexual, more explicitly reveals the director's own self-declared internalized biphobia, specifically in the form of a bias against the word bisexual. And I quote, "I was hearing myself described as a bisexual all the time, and it was feeling like nails on a chalkboard, like really gauche, really tacky, really uncomfortable to keep hearing that," Akhavan says. She continues, quote, "And I wondered, why do I hate hearing this? It's 100% true, and I said it about me, like I outed myself. But for some reason, hearing that word said all the time in such a public arena was weirdly humiliating, and I wanted to investigate why," end quote. And although Akhavan knew the title would be off-putting, she held to it in order to understand its negative connotations. Despite the director's and her protagonist Layla's biphobia, the character is, quote, "still not afraid to use the word, and neither is the series, since it's literally the title," end quote, as Jenny Roberson points out in bi.org's unicorn scale entry on the series. In the series, Akhavan, a New Yorker of Iranian descent, plays the protagonist, Gold Star lesbian Layla, who responds to the marriage proposal of her longtime girlfriend, Sadie, played by Maxine Peake, by counter-proposing a break. Flash forward, when Layla's new roommate, straight white male Gabe, asks with numerous qualifications if she thinks that, quote, maybe she's bisexual, Layla responds, echoing the director, "I don't like that word," explains that it evokes tequila and Anne Hetch, rest in peace, then proceeds to proclaim negative bisexual stereotypes. Quote, "When I hear bisexual, I think," and I don't even want to read this, or it's kind of like trigger warning, it's kind of awful stuff. "I think lame slut, your genitals have no allegiance," or maybe it's humorous, but I don't know. "Like you have no criteria for people. It's an open door policy. It's not a nice thing to be. It's not a cool thing to be. And it makes my fucking skin crawl." This is in episode 3, and I apologize for that. Reading that, this biphobic rant echoes Akhavan's reaction to the word bisexual, minus Layla's vulgarity and invocation of anatomy. However, Akhavan, the show's director and co-writer, in addition to its star, who not only identifies as bisexual, but also uses her work to address her bisexuality, and I'm thinking here also of her film appropriate behavior, does not endorse bi stereotypes. Instead, Akhavan clearly uses Layla, a newcomer to bisexuality, as a mouthpiece to articulate stereotypes in order to deconstruct and dismantle them. But I come back here to Sherry Eisner's point about using the space to dismantle stereotypes. You're still paying attention to them and giving them weight. Although viewers and critics are not necessarily sold on the effectiveness of the strategy or the show, it is no doubt Akhavan's attempt to work through her biphobia that makes it relatable to those who see the process, and off-putting to see those who see the biphobia rather than the attempt to face it head on. And now I'm going to move on to Getting By, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend's musical coming out. In the CW's Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, which ran from 2015 to 19 and is streamable on Netflix, actor Peter Gardner's incarnation of the character Daryl Whitefeather embraces his bisexuality far more than Akavon's Layla does. And, quote, affably obtuse law film partner, according to Aisha Harris, Whitefeather is not necessarily a more positive character than Layla, aside from his bisexuality. Significantly, though not the protagonist, as a bisexual male, Whitefeather differs from the bi-female protagonist in Orange is the New Black, Broad City, and the Bisexual. In her book, The B Word, focused on the representation of bisexuals in film and television, Maria Sanfilippo underscores the dearth of recurring male bisexual characters in television history, consistent with the stereotyping of bisexual males as closeted homosexuals and thus non-existent. Bisexual men are stigmatized in patriarchal, male-dominated society. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend has two other bi characters in addition to Daryl, his employee Maya, who plays a minor role, and Valencia, played by Gabrielle Ruiz, the former longtime girlfriend of Josh Chan, with whom, as I'm sure many of you know, the protagonist Rebecca Bunch, a lawyer played by director Rachel Bloom, is obsessed. Valencia finally leaves Josh and couples up with Beth. However, our attention, or my attention, will focus here on the song and dance number that serves as head lawyer Whitefeather's coming out to his employees, the scene in which bisexuality receives the most attention in Crazy Ex-Girlfriend. Shirley Lee underscores aptly the importance of this scene. Quote, as he giddily hops around the conference room, Daryl is doing more than just coming out to his colleagues. He's become one of the few male bisexual characters on TV who's given screen time to both explore his newfound understanding of his sexuality and to enter into a relationship with another character. Given that bisexual men are particularly stigmatized, Daryl's coming out is all the more important. By contrast with Orange is the New Black, sorry, I just scrolled a little bit too far. Crazy Ex-Girlfriend cuts to the chase and sings bisexual loudly and clearly. Although Crazy Ex-Girlfriend features a straight white protagonist, Bloom, no relation, as Rebecca Bunch, her, quote, goofy boss at the law firm sings his bisexual coming out not only in his own voice, but also at work rather than among close friends and family. Ironically, it is a genuine performance, a confessional spectacle. Whitefeather, whose name reflects his 1/8 Chippewa origins, comes out unabashedly through the previously mentioned over-the-top song and dance number, which aligns with the other musical scenes punctuating the series. Can I ask now how much time remains so I can decide, Lucia, if you want to tell me whether I have time to show a clip or not? And
I would ask you to wrap it up quickly because
okay. So unfortunately, you can find the clip on YouTube. Just look up Daryl Whitefeather, and I'm going to kind of speed on through till the end. If I have a couple minutes, Lucia?
Yeah.
Okay, so Gardner embraced his role as Whitefeather, noting that the character's awakening to his sexual orientation was treated seriously rather than, quote, as the butt of a joke, as the actor told Shirley Lee. But I would underscore, not being the butt of a joke is a really low bar here. Although certain of the actor's comments failed to capture Whitefeather's character entirely, the actor appreciates challenges faced by bisexual people. Gardner's appreciation of the gradual move toward Daryl's coming out makes sense, but his statement that it isn't as if, quote, all of a sudden Daryl's gay, end quote, implies that over time he is gay, which is not the case. That said, Gardner understands the importance of capturing bi representation authentically. Usually these things happen on the fly and they're like, oh, I'm bi, so he uses bi this time. Now, because now I can get something from that person. It's a very bad stereotype for bisexual people. They're not quite legitimate. And then I'll skip a bit here. Gardner understands that bisexuality is an identity that outlasts any given relationship. However, as Lee puts it aptly, to Gardner, the significance of Darrow's bisexuality isn't weighing too heavily on his mind. And Gardner actually says that it's like, he dismisses the specificity of bisexuality. I would say he's the actor, you know, but he says it's treated as any other romantic storyline. And I would suggest that misses the mark. On the one hand, love is love, as the saying goes, love beyond gender. On the other hand, the challenges as well as the joys of bisexuality are specific. And I do have much more to say, but it sounds like I'm kind of out of time here. Let's see, I'm gonna skip. If I have, Lucia, do I have time for like 1 minute or not?
I'm sorry.
Okay, so I will stop here. Okay.
Thank you. We are very
no problem.
We're running short of time. So
no worries.
Thank you, Michelle, for helping us here and for your brilliant talk, and for sharing some of my perplexities around the bisexual. So I will leave the floor now to Alex Hayden Williams. So let me pin you there. Okay.
So you can actually hear me. That will help. Sorry, I've got the curtains closed because I've got the other problem. All of the light was coming this way.
Okay.
Couldn't see the screen, but hopefully you can see me all right.
Yeah, we can see
you. You don't have to see me.
Okay, so I'll introduce you, Alex. So Alex is a bisexual writer and researcher who works on English literature, modern art, queerness, gender play, and their intersections. Alex is studying for an MSc in English literature at the University of Oxford, researching queer literary circles outside London, ranging from poetic salons near Bath to cozy cohabitation in the Welsh valleys. They also have a huge crush on Cary Grant. Don't we all, Alex?
That's mostly what this talk is about. It's mostly just justifying that. But
okay, we love that here. We love that. So the floor is yours, Alex.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to share this. Hopefully, get underway there. Can you all see that the slides all right there? Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. Thank you.
So yeah, welcome to this talk, which is Why Are You Wearing These Clothes? Bisexuality and Comedy's Gender Play from Shakespearean to Screwball. It's sort of a sketch of some ideas I've been thinking about in relation to two different performances, two different texts, which are Shakespeare's As You Like It, which you can see in the image there, and the Screwball comedy from a few centuries later, Bringing Up Baby, which is where Cary Grant comes into all this. So I'm going to start with a clip from Bringing Up Baby. This is quite a famous clip in queer circles, I think. But just to give a bit of context, Grant's character, who's a timid paleontologist who's engaged to his dull assistant, but is inevitably going to fall for Katharine Hepburn's leopard-owning Susan, because who wouldn't, is in Susan's house for the first time, having had to change his clothes, and there were no more clothes left in the house, so he's had to wear Susan's dressing gown. So hopefully you'll be able to hear the sound here, but let me know if not.
What do you want?
Who are you?
Who are you?
What, who are you?
What do you want?
Well, who are you?
I don't know. I'm not quite myself today.
Well, you look perfectly idiotic in those clothes.
These aren't my clothes.
Well, where are your clothes?
I've lost my clothes.
Well, why are you wearing these clothes?
Because I just went gay all of a sudden. Oh, excuse me. I'm sorry.
Now, see here, young man, stop this nonsense. What are you doing?
I'm sitting in the middle of 42nd Street waiting for a bus.
So this is probably the first use of the word gay in its modern usage in a film. It's a double entendre strategy here. It was actually an ad-lib for Grant. He just jumped in the air because he sort of felt like it there. And it gets around the infamous Hays Code ban, which for between the 1930s and the 1950s banned any depiction of sex perversion, which was interpreted very generally to mean absolutely anything queer explicitly on film, and led to a lot of these sort of subtexts and plays on words. It's quite wonderful now that the subtextual meaning is just the main meaning we take from this. No one looks at that and thinks he's talking about being happy. But as Peter de Cherney writes, gay was starting to connote homosexuality, and that reading was available to some audience members, especially if they had read about Grant's off-screen life. So we might wonder there what Grant's off-screen life was and what they might have read about it. In the early 1930s, his studio released a set of images with his roommate, Randolph Scott, taken actually by an openly gay photographer. And they were published to encourage an image of him as bisexual for a queer audience. Some were banned because they weren't allowed to be published because they were too erotic, but ones like this just about got away with it, that he could have appealed to both queer male audiences and the more traditional heartthrob audience, stereotypically of young women. So the way that the structure of comedy from the Shakespearean era to this screwball era, which is very frenetic, fast-paced dialogue and zany situations, is often presented as being quite similar, that it moves from a brief period of transgression where you get to see things like this to a resolution in a heterosexual, normal marriage. Grant takes off the robe and he puts on a suit and he falls in love with a woman. Rosalind in As You Like It, having switched gender, has to switch back. But what might happen if we read these texts bisexually? Well, I think that it's interesting to look at what Alexander Doty says in the fantastic book Flaming Classics, that queer cultures, like the one that formed around Grant, circulate a wide range of background material that people can use as part of how they queerly understand both texts and performers. Where might that be working in relation to Grant here? Well, I think what Elise Ray Helford says in her Journal of Bisexuality article from 2007 is interesting here. At the time, films that Grant and Hepburn had made with the openly gay director George Cukor had offered both overt and subtle resistance to monogamous heteronormative relationship structures through their bisexual romantic triangles. Grant was bisexual in his films at this point, and his star was not just a queer one, but a bisexual one. And as well as the queer erotic suggestiveness of Grant's body, I want to suggest that this bisexual coding also affects his gendering in the film. I want to do that by taking a look at the way the film's actually shot. So up until this point in the previous 35 minutes, the camera work has been very conventional. It's basically as if Howard Hawks, the director, is filming a play. It's all from waist or shoulder height. It's all flat on. It's all very parallel to the actors. There's no high shots. There's no raking angles. The camera doesn't really move that much. And if it does, it just pans like that. But when David, Grant's character, sits on Katharine Hepburn's stairs in her frilly, low-cut white dressing gown, which is actually a way of getting around the code restrictions on scenes of undressing. This is as close to naked as you can show him without having your film be censored. Something very unusual happens, and it happened at the end of the last clip, and I want to look at how it happens again here towards the end of this.
Where'd you get it? Grandpa. What are you doing here?
Susan brought me.
I don't doubt it, but why? You see, I met Remark on the phone. He said that eggs would be all right expensive, that he'd been working very, very hard in town, and that he was on the point of having a nervous breakdown.
Oh, I'm a nut from Brazil.
Oh, well, he's very excited. He must be like whatever he wants to do. Where is Kel?
Well, Susan, welcome.
What are you doing? Oh, Martha, he's like an eggshell.
Poor David really can't get a break there. But I'm really interested in these two angles that I've got here. In the first one on the left, Hawke's very workmanlike camera work suddenly adopts this really unusually high and raking angle. It's a very disruptive moment, not just in this film, but throughout all of Hawke's films. He hardly ever shoots like this. It's basically the only time he does it, where we see down the plunging and fur-lined neckline of Grant's robe, directing us our eyes straight down towards his crotch. If you look at the way that the kind of spiral that's going on there in the composition of this shot works. And he's basically cross-dressing here. He's got this sort of femme butch gendering presented by the combination of wardrobe and hair. But also, I think it's present in the filming as well in the composition. If you look at this one on the right here, it looks almost exactly like the composition of contemporary heartthrob photographs taken of him by Robert Coburn. It's, you know, he's got his hand on his chin, it's very soft, he's got this dreamy, quite lustful gaze in his eyes. And at this point, Hawks, a director who hates the Hays Code, is getting as close to breaking it as he could, I think. He's showing as erotic image of a queer coded man as he can. But he's also invoking this, which looks so much more like the soft lighting and pensive poses of Hollywood women in the 1930s, like Rosalind Russell here, than it does like the hard-edged and very confrontational images that were presented of men, like John Wayne, this kind of archetype of American masculinity in this period. So the culture of bisexuality around Grant that you see here is feeding into the film's gendering of him in quite a slippery and playful way, and vice versa. The gender play is inherently linked to the bisexuality. And I find this really interesting because Rosie Nelson, who's talking next, which is exciting in the next panel, writes in their 2020 article, "What do bisexual people look like? I don't know," that we often see our gender and sexuality as connected. And many of the interview subjects in their piece reference the ways that they transform outfits and impressions through feminization or masculinization. And this just feels, this as a concept feels just inherently true to me when I look at myself and I look at my bi friends and I look at their relationships. And I wonder whether by looking at this sort of film at Grant bisexually, we can actually find a heritage for that. And I think that's especially important because, as Nelson says later on, many of us wish to present our plurisexuality visually, but don't know how to, basically, because there's no bi type. We don't know exactly what it looks like. So we're trying to create it. And many people are doing that on their own at the moment. And this kind of representation that Michelle mentioned is coming. It's sort of starting up. We're getting more of it and it's getting better in the past 10 years. But I wonder whether we can look back and find it as well. To do that, I want to briefly look at, try and do something that Stanley Cavell did a bit, which is, you know, an easy task. The great film philosopher and theorist wrote in his book Pursuits of Happiness in 1981 that the screwball comedies basically are Shakespearean comedies and their structures and their plots resurfacing in America, of all places. If we got this link in their structure, can we pull a queer link together? Can we pull a bisexual link even? I want to understand how the conclusion of these films might deepen rather than end the queer subversions that they have throughout them, and do so by drawing a link between Grant and Rosalind, who you see on the left there, the gender switching hero of As You Like It. As You Like It is a 1590s comedy by Shakespeare, and it's a classic, brilliant Greenwood comedy. Noble cousins, who it's very much hinted are not just cousins, on the left, Rosalind and Celia, are forced out of court, and Rosalind has to adopt a masculine disguise, it's often written about as Ganymede, a shepherd boy. Falls in love with Orlando as Ganymede. Orlando is in love with Rosalind, who he met before, and Ganymede sort of acts out Rosalind. It's a brilliant, playful, very Judith Butler-y, very, very bisexual play. But by the traditional rules of Elizabethan comedies, it must end with an apparently heterosexual marriage between Rosalind and Orlando. We go from Ganymede and Orlando to Rosalind and Orlando, and a lot of the scholarship claims that this is the end of the queerness, that, as Clara Park put it in the 70s, Rosalind submits to a man who is her inferior. Under that understanding, the queerness is lost somewhere between these two images and these two moments, between Ganymede flirting with Orlando and Rosalind marrying him. But I think actually if you look at Orlando and read bisexually, just as Rosalind incorporates the masculine elements, as we see in a haircut on the right, he incorporates feminine elements. He blushes, he figures himself as a mother, as a doe, and he's described as having a pair of cast lips of Diana. He's androgynous. He's very queer-coded, in fact. And I think as a couple, their mixed-sex marriage looks a lot like a mixed-sex marriage between these two. Grant and Hepburn are so androgynous throughout the film. And they're still androgynous and they're still queer coded in this sort of quasi wedding scene that ends it. Here we see it. She's in black, he's in white. She looks like a groom, he looks like a bride. It's very like Rosalind and Orlando. And if we read it bisexually, I think we can see that the mixed sex marriage doesn't need to mean a return to cis and hetero norms. It offers a different way of understanding text, and it can offer a different way of understanding ourselves, moving past the need to read for queerness by gay kisses, for bisexuality through kissing multiple genders, but understanding it as something innate to a person's self and gendering, whether they're in a relationship or whether they're not. I think it can show that the heterosexual conclusion can actually be queer, that gender play, androgyny, and attraction to both have always been a part of bisexuality, and that we can represent, and it points towards a kind of reading representation that creates a heritage that allows people to find themselves without a pressure to prove it through sexual acts, which I know that I found a lot when I was coming out, not that long ago, really. Just to end, I think it's important as well because we know instinctively what historical lesbian and gay images look like. It's butch femme dynamics and it's buff men. No aspersions on these. I love both of these artists and both of these things. But bi images aren't as easily recognizable to the mainstream, though I think they are to us. When you look at online culture where bi culture has really thrived. Sorry, I can't believe I put this in an academic PowerPoint, but this is from the top page of a forum of plurisexual memes with plurisexual members by IRL on Reddit. And it seems like something that's newly expressed, this idea that it's without representation in high culture, but I don't think it is. I think we find it here. And I don't think this idea that this person expresses in their tweet is new either, that we're playful in, we have an attraction to androgyny that many, or at least many bi people do, that it's not the same as being straight and being gay simultaneously. It's its own discrete thing. We know that many of us are playful with gender in our relationships, including our mixed sex ones, and we have proof of that in Hepburn and Grant. We know that many of us find androgyny and play with gender very attractive, and we have proof of that in Orlando and Rosalind, who I think basically fit this tweet down to a T. And doing this, as we try to formulate a visible bi identity, can be a better way of rereading the past, I think. It disproves some hurtful and damaging things that theorists like Eve Sedgwick and David Halperin said about bisexuality reinforcing binaries rather than destroying them. It allows us to read classic film in a different way, to see the start of the beautiful friendship between Louis and Rick at the end of Casablanca as something romantic. And it makes accessible the lives of married bi historical figures like the jazz singer Bessie Smith or Fred Rogers or Nina Simone. It allows us to read for being bi and to understand ourselves as being bi in our relationships and outside them, not for bisexual acts. And I think it makes it a mode of representation that is far, far truer to life. So hopefully I've not taken up too much time there. Thank you very much. I'm going to try and figure out how to stop sharing. As much as I love Nina Simone, I don't need to see her. There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Alex. Brilliant presentation. Also, this idea of reading bisexually, it's very clever. And I am all for quoting Alexander Doty in presentation, so great kudos for that. All right, so I have a video for our last presenters that at the last minute couldn't attend. Isobel Elrick. Isobel is an independent researcher, having recently finished their MA in Gender and Media at the University of Sussex. Their research interests include bisexual plus representation on screen, transgender representation in the press, queer identities in video games, and non-human bodies within science fiction. This is their second conference, and so I will show you the video for her talk in a second. Let me share my screen. Or not. A second. Yeah, here it is.
Hi, my name is Isobel Elrick. And the identity that dares not speak its name, examining bisexual representation on television in the 21st century. I'd like to preface this with this was the topic of my undergraduate dissertation, and this is an expansion of that topic, looking forward, asking questions of what next. So please just keep that in mind whilst you're watching. I have pre-recorded my own presentation, and if anyone has any questions or wants to talk about my research, my Twitter is on the screen and should be in my speaker bio, hopefully. So please feel free to talk to me about this kind of thing. This is my interest, and I'm really excited to present my research to you today. I'd like to start my own talk with a couple of questions. Firstly, how many bisexual characters can you name from TV shows? How many of these characters explicitly state themselves to be bisexual within the TV shows? I know that for me, despite my own research interest being this specific topic, my list is woefully small and quite frankly started in the 2010s when I first saw a bisexual character on screen. Which feels weird. My first experience of a bisexual character was Clark Griffin in The 100. And I saw her story play out. I saw her be the hero and then have to make so many difficult decisions. And I saw her being in relationships with men and relationships with women, and then the creators confirming that she was bisexual. And for me, that was the first time I saw someone who was bisexual on TV. That sounds incredibly sheltered of me. I am completely aware. But it took me a bit longer before I saw my next bisexual character. And then I was in uni and I was saying that I was bisexual and I was describing myself openly as bi. And I was watching TV shows and I realised I couldn't name that many characters who called themselves bi. Kat Edison in The Bold Type calls herself bisexual, which is excellent. Rosa Diaz from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, who I ended up studying for my dissertation, had a coming out story that for me felt very important because it was the first time I saw someone have a proper coming out story as bisexual. Within my own work, I focus in a lot on bisexual characters. My undergraduate dissertation focused in on 13 from House, Brittany from Glee, Rosa from Brooklyn Nine-Nine, and Magnus Bane from Shadowhunters, all of whom were bisexual. I focus in on bisexual characters specifically because when I'm looking at tropes, they are most often applied to people, and they are most easily deconstructed from the storylines that are specifically given to bisexual characters, whether they call themselves bi or not. And that's what I study. So within my initial research, I ended up looking a lot at tropes, and I ended up using GLAAD's Where We Are on TV reports to be able to sort of build up my own understanding of what ideas surrounded bisexuality on screen. And I ended up identifying 4 major tropes that I do carry through with me when I look at bisexual characters now, mostly because you can't really escape it anymore once you've studied it. So the 4 tropes I looked at were bisexuality as promiscuous, bisexuals being highly promiscuous, sleeping with anyone because they're attracted to multiple genders, therefore they'll sleep with anyone. Bisexuals being immoral and committing reckless behaviours, which can include taking drugs, drinking excessively, casual sex. The idea that bisexuals were incapable of monogamy, but particularly that bisexuals were inherently going to cheat on their partners, because how on earth could you be bisexual and not cheat on your partners? How on earth could you be with a man and be fully satisfied as a bisexual? The last trope I looked at, which is one that sticks with me a lot, is invisibility and the dismissal of bisexuality as legitimate. That was something that, when I ended up looking into it, inspired the name of my own research, which is The Identity That Dares Not Speak Its Name, which in itself is from Sarah Bernard in the Bible. When thinking on bisexuality and bisexual representation, the early 2000s were an interesting time. 13 as a character, her bisexuality was a large facet of her identity. She came out as bisexual very early on within her storylines, and then she was sleeping around a lot. She was being extremely reckless, and she was the only one that was really being given that storyline. And even when it was discussed within the show, her storyline, her other characters would refer to her with, oh, would you have a threesome or a foursome? Or, oh, no, you can't possibly be satisfied within this. And it was almost treated as a joke and a piece of fun, which I found really interesting when I looked into it, because that's the kind of representation that I feel would be so stereotypical. And yet seeing it play out with an actual character baffled me entirely. I moved on to Brittany, and her promiscuity was seen as an inherent part of her character and treated as, oh yeah, no, it's a joke. Ha ha, Brittany sleeps with the entire school. But she was given a lot more respect for her bisexuality. It wasn't treated as the butt of the joke. And that was something I saw within my research as I moved through, was that bisexuality wasn't just the butt of the joke anymore. When it came through to looking at Rosa and at Magnus, it was treated as a part of their identity. Rosa had her coming out story where her parents dismissed her bisexuality, and her parents were just going, oh no, it's fine that you're bi, just so long as you end up with a man. And it was so interesting to go from 13 and Brittany to Rosa, who was deconstructing these ideas of, no, actually, it's not a phase. I can be bisexual. And she pushed away bisexual invisibility, which I found really interesting, because up until that point, for me, I had seen so many bisexuals that just wouldn't say that they were bisexual, that the writers would not write in any acknowledgement that they were bisexual beyond, oh, they've got partners of multiple genders and things. Magnus Bane was my only portrayal of male bisexuality in my study, and his representation was interesting because he never stated himself to be bi. He still fitted in with promiscuity, he still fitted in with being a bit reckless. It was explained. His character was 800 years old. Of course you're going to have a multitude of relationships, but he got the happy ending. He got the wedding at the end. And that meant so much to me just watching it, because there was a trend of bisexuality wasn't the butt of the joke. But as I was watching, I was keeping in mind these tropes, and I was looking at it and going, okay, what's happened? And there is a lot more reinforcement of bisexuality as legitimate. There's still ways to go, particularly with invisibility, particularly with promiscuity, with so many of these storylines coming into, oh no, they're just going to sleep around with everyone. Oh, they can't be trusted as much. But where do we go from here? Considering all of this that I've spoken about now, where can we move forward? So where do we go from here? What comes next? How can we move forward with bisexual representation, knowing the tropes that are evident of bi representation in its current form on screen, in TV, because we can see changes. We can see a positive trend towards less invisibility. We can see a positive trend towards less of the storylines of promiscuous bisexuals, immoral bisexuals, bad bisexuals being the only bisexual stories that we get to see on TV. But more can be done. So many stories that I see of bisexuality are very white. I love the story of Nick Nelson from Heartstopper and his rejection of bisexual invisibility and his emphatic response of I am bisexual, and just his entire coming out scene made me cry, in part because of what I wish that I had when I was 12, 13, 14, coming to terms with my own sexuality, and what I'm so glad that people younger than me get to have. I am aware that I'm speaking as a white person. I am more likely to see myself represented, and I see myself represented in a lot more bisexual stories, a lot more positive bisexual stories compared to so many of my peers. There are a lot more white bisexual characters that I can name than bisexual characters of colour, which is a problem. Nick Nelson, Rosa Diaz, Magnus Bane are a start. They are a start for what can be. I personally feel that in order for bisexual representation on TV, and I'm speaking very specifically for Western TV here because that's what I end up watching, we need more bisexual stories written to encompass a multitude of experiences. Because let's be honest, my own bisexual experience that I see on screen, that I got to see in part through Nick Nelson, is not the story that everyone has. Everyone deserves to see their stories. As bisexual people, we deserve for our stories to not just be confined within the tropes that I've discussed here. We deserve to see more. We deserve better. We deserve to see a multiplicity of bisexual experiences. We deserve writers to write more bisexual stories, to show that bisexuals are able to fit into so much more than the tropes that exist surrounding bisexuality, that bisexuality can be affirming and positive, that we can be the heroes in the story, and we can still be the villains. We can still have stories that fit into these tropes. That representation should not only be those stories. Representation should be so many more stories, and that is what I feel like needs to happen. I feel that in order to move forward, we need to continue the changes that have been happening, where, yeah, we're allowed bisexual characters who are immoral, who are messy, who aren't monogamous, because some bisexuals aren't monogamous, and that's okay. We deserve to see more stories of bisexuality, and we deserve to be able to see ourselves represented. Everyone deserves to see themselves represented, and I really hope that the current positive trend continues and we get to see more bisexual stories going forward in the coming years, that we get to see a multitude of bisexual stories in the coming years, that we get to see more bisexual men coming out on screen and saying, I am bisexual, and being proud, and affirming that men can be bisexual too. We deserve to see more than what we've been given. We deserve more. And I really hope that we get more. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you to all the panelists. Isobel, Michelle, and Alex for these amazing talks. We are also discussing things a bit in the chat. There is a conversation going on around bad bisexuals and respectable bisexuals. That is one of the main topics probably of the talks. So is there any questions that you want to ask our panelists? We have just a couple of minutes, but maybe somebody is curious about something. Or maybe Michelle and Alex, if you want to comment on this good bisexual and bad bisexual discussion that we are having on the chat, also from the perspective of the representation of the past that Alex has focused on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with regards to the Hays Code, because I think a lot of the time the way that they got around like being able to show a queer character on screen was just have them be evil, or like a queer coded character. So I think you definitely get a lot of bad representation there that was probably damaging. But I also think that there's some kind of joy in reclaiming that, in reclaiming the queer villain as a trope and as a figure. So yeah, I think that's most of what I have on that. I haven't thought too hard about that. But.
And I think, as I wrote in the chat, like, I think once we have enough bi representation, then it won't matter so much, like, is it good? I mean, there are plenty of straight villains, right? So we should earn the right to have bi villains and bi, you know, cheating monogamous bisexuals, etc. But, you know, that diversity of all different kinds once we have enough, right? And then it won't only be about coming out stories, it'll go beyond that and so forth. That's, yeah.
Yeah, I think scarcity of characters and stories will never help. And once we have abundance there, as in other many areas of our lives, then we will have better stories, better characters, and better representation. All right, so I am afraid I have to end this panel because we're running late, but thank you so much for your contributions to this day. And if you want to keep on chatting, the lobby chat is always there for continuing our conversations. See you in the other panels. Thank you.